first I want to say thank you for taking the time to have me here. I have been to Augusta a number of times. I've been to the CSRA because I understand how vital it is to the state of Georgia. And the reason I'm running for governor is embodied by this space. That this is a community that has done extraordinarily well in a number of ways, leading in cybersecurity, developing opportunities, doing a great deal of work with tech, and building moments for people to make improvements. But we also know that Augusta continues to struggle with poverty, that there are challenges in the school systems, that there are healthcare issues that can't be met by some of the world-class hospitals in the community because not everyone has access to healthcare. And elections are about choices. We can choose to continue to serve those we've served, or we can start to enlarge our vision and bring more people to the table. I'm running for governor because I think everyone deserves the freedom and the opportunity to thrive. I spent 11 years in the state legislature, 7 of which as the Democratic leader. And in that job, I worked with Democrats and Republicans to move the state forward. Under my leadership, we passed legislation to serve our military and our veterans, including legislation that mandates in the state of Georgia that you get to keep your job when you're deployed. We also passed legislation to allow military spouses to get licenses on a speedy basis when they are trying to find jobs, instead of having to wait 2 to 3 years to jump through the hoops. I worked with Republicans to advance the single largest investment in public transportation in Georgia, including the largest investment in public transit, $75 million in 2015. I worked with Governor Nathan Deal to continue and expand his criminal justice reform platform, appointed by him to several subcommittees as well as the Criminal Justice Reform Council. And I know how important that work is, because as you know in Augusta, one of the leading challenges here is that our mental health system is not working well. Right now, the leading provider of mental health supports are our jails, our sheriffs, and our police chiefs, finding folks and trying to get them the help they need instead of having a statewide network of mental health. I know that the solution to that challenge is Medicaid expansion. It will allow the state of Georgia to join 33 other states, Democratic and Republican states, because this is not a partisan issue. This is a people issue, and it is a critical issue because it would not only allow us to provide coverage for mental health supports and substance abuse treatment, it will allow us to cover nearly 500,000 Georgians, to create 56,000 jobs, and to do so at a price that we can well afford. Because right now, Georgia's spending about $1.75 billion on uncompensated care, those who go to the doctor whether they can afford it or not. Medicaid expansion will actually allow us to draw down $3 billion a year, dollars that can be invested in our communities and invested in new jobs. But larger than that is the conversation about the kind of state we want to be. I want us to be a state where everyone is seen, everyone is heard, and everyone is included. And that's why as Democratic leader, I took it upon myself to travel the state. Before I decided to run for governor, I'd already been to more than 150 counties in Georgia, not because my job demanded it, but because my ethic demanded it. I could not lead people whose communities I didn't know. So I went to Burke County, and I've been to Richmond and Columbia County. I've been across the state of Georgia, and I've continued that work as a candidate. And I've now been to all 159 counties. And I can tell you, no matter where we live, no matter where we are, every Georgian wants the same thing: access to a solid education for their children from cradle to career. They want to make certain that we can build a thriving and diverse economy for all 159 counties. And they want an engaged and effective leader who will expand access to Medicaid, create access and opportunities for health care, and take care of every Georgian. That's why I'm running, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Good. I'll start off with a question. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution had an article recently that 80% of the Democratic contributions coming into your campaign are coming from California, New York, Washington, D.C. in the last 3 months. Why are those people so interested in who should be the governor of Georgia?
Well, let me begin by saying that 38,000 of our contributions are from Georgians. In fact, that is more than 5 times the number of contributions my opponent received in the same period. Individual Georgians writing checks $3, $25, $100. And so I far outstrip any candidate running right now for the constitutional offices in the number of individual Georgians giving to my campaign, Democrat or Republican. And by comparison, yes, my opponent has raised more money from within the state, but it's largely from corporations, not from actual individual voters. But the reason that national folks are interested in Georgia is that we've asked them to be. We've brought industry here from California. We have the single largest film industry outside of LA in the United States, right here in Georgia, and I want to keep it here.
And so made a film here.
They did. And that's why I've spent time meeting with studio heads, trying to make certain that they know that under my governorship, they can continue to bring their films here, because they're terrified of my opponent's pledge that he will pass the religious freedom legislation and make us lose 100,000 jobs. Not just film jobs, but all the other jobs that have grown up around it. We have beauty shops, and we have beauticians and barbers, we have grips and gaffers who will lose their jobs if religious freedom, if RFRA passes in Georgia. I've been to New York because we're bringing in a lot of resources to fund our tech industry here in Georgia. And I want to make sure investors know that Georgia is a good bet. I've been around this country and I've talked to folks because I want Georgia to be the #1 state in our nation. And the reality is every dollar that I raise goes to helping Georgians have a stronger opportunity in this election. I'm proud that we are a locally based election that is nationally known, because we want Georgia to be a local state that has a national reputation for success and for progress. And I'm very proud of the work we've done to get that done.
Ms. Abrams, what are you hearing as you travel the states? Specifically, what are Georgians' concerns and how would you address them?
I have been consistent in this campaign from June 2017, when I launched my campaign in Albany, to today. And I've had the same conversation about the same 3 issues. I haven't had to pivot, I haven't poll tested them, but I've seen them work. And that is first and foremost, people want to educate their children from cradle to career. That means investment in early childhood learning. We know that children who fail to get that early investment fall behind and rarely catch up. We want to close the waiting list for our 4-year-old pre-K program. This year it was 5,000 students roughly. Those are 5,000 4-year-olds who won't get a do-over. And folks want us to fully fund our K-12 program. I'm proud of the work that Governor Deal did this year to get that done, to finally fully fund the QBE formula, but there are 2 problems. One is it's the first time we've done it in almost 20 years. That means we've lost $9 billion from our public education system, and those are real impacts on children who've lost opportunities and schools that have lost resources. But number 2, our formula is not designed for a 21st century school system. We have to update our formula. We know it is more expensive to educate a child who's rural because the transportation costs are high. We know it's harder to educate a child who is poor because there's a direct correlation between poverty and educational outcomes. We know it's more expensive to educate a child who has special needs or who speaks English as a second language. And our formula has to be updated to reflect that. And no matter where I go in Georgia, folks are excited about us investing in wraparound services. So we're educating the whole child. That's nutritional supports, making sure they have access to health care, being certain that they have the support they need for mental health issues. It's one of the best ways for us to break the school to prison pipeline. But they're also interested in post-secondary opportunities. That's why I'm the only candidate with a robust plan for creating 22,000 apprenticeships by 2022. And our neighbor, South Carolina, has already created 17,000 of them. Georgia lags far behind, and that's inexcusable. I want us to get there by 2022. But I also want us to restore Georgia's reputation for free technical college, not just for those who are graduating from our high schools, but for those whose jobs are leaving and they need to get retrained. And I want us to make college debt free by creating a need-based portion of the Hope Scholarship, which I fought to protect in 2011, but also adding more service-cancelable loans so we can increase the number of nurses and teachers and doctors and first responders. If we do those things, that's what they want. The second issue is jobs. People want good paying jobs. Yes, Georgia has brought in more jobs in the past 16 years, a great number of jobs. Our unemployment rate is low. The problem is a lot of folks have 2 or 3 of those jobs because the jobs they have are not good paying. And so we have to increase wages by bringing a more diverse, robust set of jobs to the state of Georgia. Right now, our 2 leading industries are agriculture and hospitality, and those are good, solid ways to make a living. But I want us to diversify so that we're taking advantage of renewable energy, bringing in renewable energy jobs to the tune of 25,000 to 45,000 new jobs, expanding Medicaid, creating 56,000 jobs in the state of Georgia, and doing the work it takes to invest in small businesses, creating a $10 million small business financing pool that allows small businesses like a mechanic who wants to buy his shop or a home health care aide who wants to start her own small business. We have to invest in those jobs as well. And lastly, it's health care. Medicaid expansion is a critical need in the state of Georgia. We've lost too many hospitals already. We've got 21 that are on a watch list, and we are forfeiting $8 million a day by our intractable refusal to accept Medicaid. Mike Pence expanded Medicaid. Jerry Brown expanded Medicaid. If Mike Pence of Indiana and Jerry Brown of California can agree on anything, Georgia needs to get on board.
Susan?
Do you mind? Okay. You've made mention a couple times about your plans for mental health, or you've alluded to it. Would you speak to that in greater detail?
Absolutely. Mental health is an issue that unfortunately Georgia has fallen far behind on. When we shut down Central Hospital down in Milledgeville, we deinstitutionalized, but we did not put sufficient resources into our local communities to truly address the challenge. And that is why in the state of Georgia, the #1 provider of mental health care is not our hospitals, it's our prison system, it's our jail system. You talk to any sheriff, they will tell you they spend a lot of their resources putting people in jail, not because they're in danger, but because they're sick. And that's because we do not have the resources we need. 1/3 of Georgia's counties do not have a licensed social worker. Half do not have a licensed psychologist. And with the opioid crisis adding on to a drug addiction network and crisis that we've been facing for more than 20 years, we have a lot of folks who are self-medicating and not getting the support they need. And I take this very personally. I have a younger brother who is a brilliant man, went to Morehouse College, but dropped out before his senior year because he has a drug addiction. That drug addiction drove him to the streets, and eventually he was arrested and incarcerated. And we got him a good lawyer, but we didn't get him out because he needs to be held accountable. I believe in accountability. But it was while he was in jail, while he was in prison, that he was diagnosed as bipolar. And we discovered he's likely been bipolar since he was 16 years old. And so he went more than a decade without a diagnosis, which meant he went without treatment. And he did what so many young people do, what so many people with mental health challenges do. He self-medicated. And it becomes a self-fulfilling, vicious cycle. We do not provide supports, so people self-medicate. They can't get the support they need to get off of the drugs, and so they reoffend. And Walter's one of them. He has been in and out of prison, not because he doesn't stabilize when they give him the help he needs, but because he loses his health care the minute he gets out of jail. I want Georgia to do the job of expanding Medicaid because it's the one way we have of providing access to health care for those who are ex-offenders. They cannot get insurance without getting a good job, and it's hard to get a good job when you've been incarcerated. They can't find stable housing because it's rare that an apartment will rent to someone who was last in the state penitentiary. And so in Georgia, because we have the 4th highest incarceration rate in the nation until 2016, we have thousands of people who face the dual challenges of mental health care challenges as well as criminal justice records. We have to solve both of those problems if we want a truly productive society. But writ large, we know that mental health challenges face our children in our schools. Often they are suspended or expelled as opposed to getting the supports they need. And so we're putting them on a school to prison pipeline that will cost us in the long run. And we've created a stigma where senior citizens aren't willing to ask for help and they instead suffer in silence. This is a statewide crisis, and it's one we can solve if we take advantage of Medicaid expansion, which allows us to actually invest in the mental health parity proportion of our insurance plans, which means we can take those dollars, put it into hiring more folks, creating more opportunities, really working with our community service boards, and starting to erase the stigma of mental health in the state of Georgia.
Rick?
Each of your answers so far is you've managed to sneak in Medicaid. Every single answer, so I've got to ask it on Medicaid. Regarding your proposal to expand it, I guess I have 2 questions. First of all, wouldn't that flood the system potentially with able-bodied people who either choose not to work or have somehow made themselves unable to work? And also, would you, in that vein, would you support a work requirement tagging on to Medicaid?
So I do not support a work requirement because Medicaid expansion is designed to actually provide health care coverage to as many people as possible because we have a healthcare finance system that is based on insurance coverage. We know that many of the people who would be eligible for Medicaid expansion are working people. They are able-bodied working people who are considered too wealthy to qualify for existing Medicaid in Georgia, which basically caps out for individuals at, in fact, no individual single person can get it. You have to have a dependent, and you're capped out at about $6,700. Medicaid expansion would be for those who make more than $7,000 and less than $17,000 by and large. That can mean someone who's working at McDonald's who doesn't qualify for health care coverage. And so we have a lot of able-bodied working people who would be denied access to health care. But I also know that there are a lot of folks who are taking care of family members because they are taking care of folks who have other medical needs who are being denied access to care themselves. Federal courts have struck down work requirements. I do not believe they're necessary. But more importantly, the fundamental premise is wrong. Our healthcare finance system requires insurance. Medicaid expansion is a critical piece of this, and it is not a partisan issue. Republican-led states, Democrat-led states have both expanded Medicaid and have seen costs drop for everyone. 11 states that expanded Medicaid that are similarly situated to Georgia have seen the healthcare premiums for everyone drop between 7 to 10%. States like Georgia have a $1.7 billion uncompensated care rate, which means people who go to the doctor whether they can afford to or not, because being poor doesn't mean you don't get sick. They go to the hospital, they use the services, they leave. That costs Georgia $1.7 billion a year. We all pay that. And if we expanded Medicaid, we would pay into the system $250. They cut their uncompensated care rate in half. That means more money that our counties can spend on law enforcement, more dollars that can go back into our school systems, more dollars that can go into infrastructure. It is a win-win for everyone. And so my fundamental belief is that our responsibility is to expand Medicaid because it's the only way to stabilize our healthcare finance system. I'm a tax attorney by training with a specialty in healthcare finance. When I practiced law at a private firm, that was one of my areas of expertise. And so for me, this is a math conversation. It is poor economics to refuse Medicaid expansion. And we're seeing this conversation across the country. There are only 17 states left that have said no. But North Dakota has put it on the ballot. Utah is working on it. Conservative states across the country understand that Medicaid expansion is the final piece to stabilize what has been an unstable healthcare system. And I think Georgia has to do its job and get on board.
Do you consider yourself a progressive candidate, and how are you a progressive candidate yourself?
I'm running for governor because I am the best candidate. Yes, I bring very strong progressive values that are Georgia values. Educating our children from cradle to career is a Georgia value. We all believe in it. The issue has been we haven't had leaders willing to make the investment. I believe that we should create good paying jobs across the state of Georgia in every community. That is a good value because it's about moving our state forward, and that is absolutely progress. And I believe in Medicaid expansion because it's the only way to save rural hospitals. I've been to Wheeler County where when the city of Glenwood lost their hospital, they lost 30% of their workforce. That is a travesty and a tragedy, and it's being replicated across southwest Georgia. Southeast Georgia is facing the same challenges, and so is North Georgia. We have to invest in Medicaid because that's the only way we can stabilize those economies, bring back jobs, because no company is going to relocate to a community that does not have access to a doctor. I think that there are frames that we can use to describe people's politics, but what voters need to understand is that I'm the most pragmatic, the most capable, and the most qualified candidate for governor of Georgia.
Let me jump in then, kind of tagging along with that. You were quoted as saying that in 2008 you set out to disrupt the operations of the Republicans and slow down their agenda. Is that true? And as governor, how would you reconcile that?
As Democratic leader starting in 2010, my job was to lead our House caucus. In 2008, as a rank and file member, my job was to be a good member of the Democratic Party, and what I did then and what I did as leader is the same, which is that I worked with my Republican colleagues as much as I could, but when I saw that we were heading in the wrong direction, I leveraged the mechanics of the legislature to get bad things stalled and to get good things done. And I think if you talk to both Republicans and Democrats who served with me for my 11 years, they will tell you that there was no Democrat who was more engaged in helping understand the legislation, work across the aisle, and get good done. I'm the only candidate I know of who got an A rating from the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and the Friend of Labor Award in the same year for the same work. I've been lauded by Republicans and Democrats for my ability to work across the aisle, but we do come from different ideological positions. And part of the responsibility of any leader is to say where you stand, to articulate the values that you hold, and to work to make them so. A good leader understands that values drive how you make decisions, but that being willing to compromise and work together is how you get good done. Because in the end, people don't care about your party, they care about their lives. And if you look at my record in the legislature, I am the only candidate in this race who has a consistent record of bipartisan leadership where I will stand always on my values and stop things that I believe are contrary to those values, but will always work together to get good done for Georgia.
Thank you.
A few weeks ago, you were in Augusta meeting with some women veterans, and there were at least a couple of protesters outside who were, admitted white supremacists. How often have you run into that on the campaign trail?
I have attracted more and more protesters as I've attracted more and more attention. And I'm always saddened that people believe that they should use hate to communicate their beliefs and their values. I was even more concerned about the fact that these were men, and it was mostly men, a few women, who would confront our veterans and question their patriotism. That is what was most galling about that moment. But as I do in everything I engaged, I had conversations, I let them ask questions, and then they moved along, because I'm not going to meet hate with hate. That's not an effective strategy for anything. And so while I'm very saddened by their belief systems and very disturbed by their willingness to espouse such vile rhetoric, I'm not going to lower myself to have the same kind of response.
Ms. Abrams, I'd like to read you a quote and then
Okay.
give you an opportunity to respond.
Sure.
It says, Stacey Abrams' extreme agenda builds upon the systemic failures of Obamacare by moving us towards a government-run, single-payer healthcare system that will cost billions, triple state income taxes, worsen the doctor shortage, dramatically reduce access to quality care, and ultimately bankrupt our state. Her plan puts the government, not the individual, in charge of healthcare needs. Please respond.
Once again, my opponent willfully misleads and misunderstands our system, and I'm not certain
Will,
Yes.
whether.
I want you to meet my son.
No,
Stacey
Stacey.
Hi, how are you?
Morris, good to see you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Stacey Abrams.
Hey, everybody, how y'all doing?
Excuse me, I'm not gonna
It's
use
okay, no
it.
worries.
Personal interruption.
Please.
Certainly. I mean, as I was saying, my opponent likes to willfully mislead about not only what has happened, but what needs to happen. Georgia has a state-based healthcare finance system, meaning that a number of our hospitals are community hospitals, county hospitals. They are already funded by counties and by the state in partnership with the federal government. That's how it has been for the last 40 years. What the Affordable Care Act did was say that the way we meet the challenges of our healthcare system is that we have to expand the number of people who have access to health insurance, because that's how we finance care in the state of Georgia. It's how we finance care in America. There are two parts to it. The first part was the ACA exchanges, which allowed more people to buy health insurance on the marketplace. The second part was Medicaid expansion, which allowed those who did not have access to private sector health insurance to also get access to health insurance. The challenge for Georgia is that we have a low wealth, low wage population, a very large one. We have 500,000 Georgians who do not have the resources necessary to buy into the exchanges, but they make too much money under Georgia law, make more than $7,000, and they're not in the special category, so they're not eligible for Medicaid. The only solution to that problem is to take advantage of the full system, which 33 other states, led by Republican governors and Democratic governors, have done. It will not triple taxes. Nothing I'm proposing will require an increase in taxes. In fact, it will save Georgia money, because right now Georgia forfeits $8 million a day in Georgia taxpayer dollars that we have paid into the system, but we are not drawing down because of our refusal to expand Medicaid. $8 million that could have saved rural hospitals in Stewart-Webster County, that could have saved the hospital in Glenwood, that could have saved hospitals across the state, North and South Georgia. And we, until we expand Medicaid, cannot take advantage. Number two is a fundamental misunderstanding of how healthcare works to say that individuals have the solution. Individuals do not offer themselves health insurance. You have to buy it in the marketplace. And we have to allow everyone to participate in that marketplace. Medicaid expansion will draw down $3 billion, but create $6 billion of economic output, 56,000 jobs in the state of Georgia. That is the best economic development plan that Georgia could have. Investment of our own dollars into our own success. The last thing I'll say is this. I want every Georgian to be able to get a good job, but we know in rural communities we cannot convince a company to move there. If they know that if one of their workers gets hurt, it will take them 2 hours to get to help. They'd rather go to a larger city where there's already existing health care. And under the Georgia Chamber of Commerce's own example, and this is not a liberal organization, under their conservative estimate, a quarter of Georgia's rural counties are going to be in deep trouble seeking health care in the next decade. We have to solve this problem now. There is a solution that is waiting for us, and we have to stop having leaders who are too mean and too cheap to take back our money.
Our national debt at the federal level in printed money is $22 trillion, that's with a T. We have another unfunded group of obligations Medicare, Medicaid scholarships, on and on, of 80 or 90. So we have well over $100 trillion worth of debt. Some of it's funded, some of it's not funded in the nation. If we do what you're suggesting with regard to Medicare, and you threw out a big number a minute ago, that number's gonna have to come from the federal government, and it's gonna continue to make our federal debt problem worse. Speak to me about your concern about our federal debt, where we go, how much we pay ourselves, how much we look to the government to do for us, states working with federal, and you've touched on a number of things, whether that is the case.
So our healthcare finance system in the United States has always been a mix of healthcare that is subsidized through federal dollars, Medicare for seniors, Medicaid for those who are disabled, who are blind, those who are pregnant, and those who are poor under the extreme limit. And this has been how we've been able to provide access to healthcare, because we realize as a society that being sick is a danger to everyone. That a person who has tuberculosis but does not get treated puts everyone at risk. That a person who has the flu that does not get treated puts their entire workforce at risk. And so as a society, we determined long ago that it was better for all of us if we had a healthier population. That illness is a danger to productivity, it's a danger to our economy. And as such, we created a system where we encourage people to purchase insurance on the private market, but we've consistently subsidized employers to provide access to that health insurance. Because we know that the market left to its own devices would charge too much. And so the state and the federal government has long stepped in and said we're going to regulate the market, but we're also going to subsidize it because we know that we have to provide access to care. Medicaid expansion for Georgia is a critical possibility, and it's a critical necessity because we already spend $1.75 billion a year as a state on what's called uncompensated care, because people get sick whether they can afford to or not. That $1.75 billion, however, doesn't show up in an invoice at the end of the year. It shows up in our property taxes going up every year. Because when the counties can't meet their obligation, they have to increase property taxes because that's their major mechanism for funding hospitals. It shows up in statewide taxes because we have to kick in for those who did not or could not pay for themselves. And so we're already paying $1.75 billion as a state. But we're also a state of 10.5 million people who've been paying our taxes into the federal coffers. And what Medicaid expansion says is we get some of our money back. And that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for us to participate in a system that we're already a part of. Because we have already put money in. We have a population that needs our money back, and we need to be able to draw down the dollars to which we're entitled. I'm simply saying that Georgia shouldn't be on the short end of the stick, because 33 other states are getting their dollars. Kentucky, Arkansas, Ohio, Indiana, Louisiana. Georgia should not be on the short end of this equation because we refuse to take back the money that we've already invested. Because our contribution to this country makes us worthy of getting our dollars back. And so for me, this is basic economics. You do not leave money lying on the table, especially when it's yours. That's why we need to expand Medicaid in the state of Georgia.
I've read that you want to roll back the Georgia tax cuts. Why?
I did not agree with the tax cuts at the time they were passed, and I think as we saw from the GAO yesterday, it is increasing our deficit by a dramatic amount. But I have no interest and no intention of revisiting this legislation when I become the governor of Georgia. As a tax attorney, someone with a specialty in tax policy, I do not believe that you pass tax laws until you understand their consequence. And we anticipated something that we do not know will come to fruition, and I just think it's bad policy making to pass laws that could possibly destabilize your economy without really fully understanding the economic impact. And so my opposition was simply that we didn't have enough information. We're starting to see that information, and unfortunately, it is not bearing out. But the reality is we've already changed the law, and the law is the law of the land.
So you don't want to roll back the state tax cuts?
I'll ask a question. You talked about the A ratings you got from groups a few minutes ago. You got an F rating from the NRA. And you've talked in your campaign about gun safety, and the NRA, of course, advocates gun safety as well. But you tweeted recently that you're proud to have an F rating from the NRA. Are you really proud of that?
Yes, because their F rating is based on the fact that I have opposed what I think are very dangerous laws in the state of Georgia that erode our safety. And I begin this as someone who knows how to shoot a shotgun. My great-grandmother taught me how to shoot when I was younger. I grew up in Mississippi. I learned how to shoot a shotgun. Number one, I learned you don't point it at anybody else. And number two, I learned the person who holds that weapon, holds that firearm, has the supreme responsibility for everyone's safety around. We have not passed laws in Georgia that ensure that safety. Campus carry is dangerous. Georgia is a state that has used our college campuses to actually increase an opportunity throughout our state, which means we have high school students on those campuses. We have daycare centers on those campuses. Those are vulnerable populations that should not be exposed to the danger of a handful of folks who have access to weapons on the college campuses. I oppose guns everywhere. I do not believe you should be able to bring weapons into our airports. I don't think anyone drinking at a bar should have a pistol strapped to their side. I think that churches, and luckily we were able to modify the language that churches have the option, but I also believe in the private sector having the right to say yes or no to having weapons on their property. And it's an erosion of their rights for us to push guns everywhere. I believe that a universal background check is a smart thing to do, because a crime in Georgia may have a different title than a crime in Montana. And I want to know when someone comes to the state of Georgia to buy a weapon, especially in a private sale or a gun show, that we know who we're selling to. I believe in the 3-day waiting period, because we know that often when people need access to a gun immediately, it's to cause harm to themselves or others. And there's no such thing as emergency deer hunting, so everyone can wait 3 days. And that 3 days gives us access to mental health records, to criminal records, but also time for people to get the help they need. I met a mother named Barbara whose daughter committed suicide at Georgia Tech because she was able to walk down the street to a pawn shop and buy a handgun. We know that young people have one of the highest rates of suicide. If you try to commit suicide with any other means besides a handgun, you're 90% likely to fail. But if you use a handgun, you're 90% likely to succeed. That 3-day waiting period could have saved Barbara's child's life. I believe that emergency protective orders mean a lot. That means giving a judge the ability to determine that someone poses a danger to themselves or others, and that we can't wait to protect folks. That's how you interfere in some of the mass shootings we've seen. I do not believe an AR-15 is a weapon that most people need to own. I don't believe assault weapons, and I've shot an AR-15. It's a powerful feeling, but you also realize that the purpose of that weapon is carnage, and that should not be something that we have walking on our streets. And I believe fundamentally that if you have been convicted of domestic abuse or stalking, you should not be entitled to have a weapon to make you better at harming those around you. And those are things with which, unfortunately, the NRA disagrees with me, and therefore they give me an F, and I proudly wear that F, the only bad grades my parents have ever been proud of.
I do know hunters that may take issue with the emergency deer hunting thing.
I know, it feels like an emergency, but...
How would you define an assault weapon? Because I'm not sure I know how.
Well, an assault weapon tends to be high capacity. It tends to be designed for, essentially, for carnage. And if you look at laws that have been drawn up to address assault weapons, the reality is gun manufacturers are very innovative. And there will always be new designs and new styles. And that's why the legislation, when you see it, tends to be very specific and very exact and should be updated. And what I would say is that I want us to come together and actually determine what weapons make sense and which ones do not. But most of the weapons that were designed for military use should not be converted to civilian use.
You both, though, the NRA and you both agree on gun safety. Shouldn't you get at least a D minus?
I've gotten a D before and I didn't know how, but it was probably that time. but here's my point. I think the NRA in its original inception, and in fact as late as the 1970s, it was an organization that truly was focused primarily on safety. My dad owns a lot of guns. We buy him a gun. We got him a gun cabinet. We get him a gun every year because he likes them. And I've gone target shooting and trap shooting. I went and learned how to shoot. That's where I shot my AR-15. I was at a former VMI commandant. He has a little gun range he calls Unlucky Mountain, and I've gone to go shoot there. It's fun. I enjoy it. But I also understand my responsibility that I believe in the right to bear arms. I believe in the Second Amendment. But the difference is, do you believe in the Second Amendment without believing that those around you deserve safety as well. And I think where the NRA and I depart is when they stopped focusing on safety and started focusing primarily and exclusively on preservation at all costs, because there ceased to be an actual conversation about what makes sense. We have reached a time in our society where we have to have a real conversation, where Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, progressives and non-progressives have to come together and say that we have to talk about how gun safety actually works in the 21st century. And unfortunately, the NRA has not been willing to be a part of that discussion.
I'm going to ask a question and then open it up to the panel for follow-up, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay. What do you think?
Frightened. That was
Okay. What do you think of the Electoral College? Should it be eliminated, as Hillary Clinton and others have suggested?
So I was co-sponsor with my Republican colleagues in the legislature of the popular vote process because I believe this. I think the Electoral College made sense at its inception, but we are a much more sophisticated, much more engaged society. And I think regardless of whether we're talking about a recent election or past elections, the popular vote should carry. And it has two effects. One is that states like Georgia often get left out of the conversation, which means we're often left out of decision making and left out of benefits because so many candidates focus only exclusively on those states they see as competitive. They should have to compete for every vote in every state. And so I believe that really lifting up the popular vote is the way that we make certain our leaders have to pay attention to everyone. And having come from communities that have been overlooked and ignored, it is the best way to make that happen. Secondly, I think it continues to legitimize participation in our democracy. When people know that their votes really do matter, then they are more likely to be engaged. And I think that's always good for the body politic. I believe in democracy. I know we're a republic, but we're also a democracy. And the more people who think that if they show up and they participate, there's a value to it, that's what we want as a society. And so my mission would be to make certain that Georgia participates fully and is seen as part of the United States of America when it comes to making the best decision, the biggest decision in our years, which is electing the President of the United States.
Let me jump in then, since I'm from Kansas. And, I mean, you said that every vote should count, but if were it not for the Electoral College, votes in Kansas might not count. And you could foresee a day when we'd never see another president outside of California, New York, Texas, and the most populous states. I mean, how are the interests of the smaller states protected without the Electoral College?
I think the smaller states are currently ignored because of the Electoral College, because people are still going to the largest states. They're still fighting. You see people traipsing their way to Iowa. You don't see a long line going to Kansas. You see folks heading over to Florida, and they hop right over Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. I want them to have to come to every state. I want them to have to argue, because as a candidate, I can tell you, I'm not ignoring a single community. I just came from Louisville. I was in Waynesboro. I'm going to every county because I know that to win this election, I need every vote. And to assume that I should only run my campaign in the 4 largest counties in Georgia or the 10 largest counties in Georgia means I'm bad at math. The math says I should go everywhere there's a possibility to get a vote. And that means that, yes, it might take more time and it might be more labor intensive, but it's the best way to truly win an election. And I think on the national level, we should ask for the same. That whether you live in Utah or Kansas or Mississippi, whether you live in Idaho or Iowa, you should be treated as an American, and people should have to fight for our votes instead of spending ungodly sums of money targeting the exact same people the exact same way ad nauseum for 2 years. I'd rather we have a system where people actively compete for every vote, because when they have to compete for every vote, they can't take for granted a Kansas vote. They can't take for granted a Georgia vote. They've got to fight for every vote, and I think that's the right thing to do.
And so
It's your room. You don't have to raise your hand.
So you don't feel like that with the concentration of people in places like New York, California, we would have a balance, that we need the balance that the Electoral College gives us?
I believe that there was a time where the Electoral College made sense, but that was primarily based on sophistication and access to information. I think that if you aggregated states that may have small populations on their own, but when pushed together have larger populations, you will find that the battle of ideas and the battle of ideologies will continue unabashed. If you've been to California, depending on what part of California you're in, you could be in very, very conservative territory or very, very liberal territory. The point is, everyone should be able to consider that their vote counts. And that's the fundamental nature of what the Electoral College now erodes, because it also diminishes the likelihood of active participation. And I think in the balance, our mission should be more people lifting their voices and holding their leaders accountable. That's why we have elections. And I think that the popular vote makes certain that people are actually being heard and they are being treated and that their votes are being valued.
So majority rule.
I believe yes, that in our society, the majority of the voters should make the decision about our leaders. That's how we've operated. And that's exactly how my campaign and my election is going to operate. Now, I do believe that there's legitimacy in the House and the Senate continuing to be allocated as they are, because I do think that overall, having the apportionment of our Senate guaranteeing that everyone has 2 votes, regardless of the population, in the Senate makes absolute sense. But the presidency is a singular job, and that presidency should be determined by the majority votes allocated in the United States.
I want to be respectful of your time because I know you are on a schedule. What time do we need to
So
finish?
we have about, oops, that's not measuring right. We have about 8 minutes left.
Okay. Would you like to speak to one of the greatest misconceptions that it's been shared about you or your campaign?
Do you want to tell me which one it is?
No?
We were hoping you'd do it.
I think you'd be the best
Well,
qualified to
thank
tell
you.
us which one.
I haven't watched as much television, but I've heard tell that some things have been said. What I want people to understand is that I do recognize that my candidacy is historic in its way. That should I become the next governor of Georgia, I will be the first black woman to be elected in the history of the United States to the office of CEO of a state. And I am proud to be the person who could possibly make that so. But I do not want anyone's vote because I'm African American. I do not want anyone's vote because I'm a woman. I want their votes because they understand that my race and my gender have led me to have experiences that have opened me up to understanding the challenges that people face. But I want them to elect me because I'm better, because I am a business owner who has started small businesses that have helped create or retain thousands of jobs across the state of Georgia. That's why I'm so bullish on investing capital in our small businesses, because I know that as much as we want to bring Amazon and large companies to Georgia, that we will get 50,000 jobs possibly. I'd rather us be equally excited about investing in 5,000 small businesses, helping them get access to capital to create 10 good paying jobs each, because those are 50,000 jobs that never leave Georgia. They become the anchors in communities that are often overlooked by economic development. I want folks to know that I was a really very strong Democratic leader, but I was a Georgia state leader. My job was to work across the aisle, and I worked with Governor Deal on health care. I worked with him on issues of making sure that military families had access to the health care they needed. I worked with him on kinship care, making sure grandparents raising grandchildren kept these children out of the foster care system and guaranteed they had access to supports. I worked with Governor Deal on transportation, on criminal justice reform. And I did so very happily because I believe fundamentally the job of a leader is to help everyone. That's my responsibility. But I'm also very proud to have single-handedly blocked the single largest tax increase in Georgia history. I do not intend to raise taxes in Georgia. I do intend for us to raise expectations. We are capable of more, and we have to make certain our priorities reflect our values in the state. And our values say that every Georgian should have the freedom and the opportunity to thrive. And I'm the only candidate in this race with a legislative record and a civic record and a political record of actually making that so. I'm running for governor because I am the only candidate who has detailed, comprehensive plans for how this happens. If you go to my website, you may be stuck there for a few days because we have 100 single-spaced pages with ideas about what we need to do, but also how we're going to pay for it. Because I think it's important for people to know not only what you want to accomplish, but how you're going to get it done. That's why I'm running for governor, because I've been trained to do good. My parents raised me with 3 values: go to church, go to school, take care of each other. Those are the values of having faith, having a strong moral core that helps dictate how I make decisions. They raised me to believe in education, to know that that is the most transformative way that you can make a life for yourself and your family. And they raised me to believe in service. Even though we grew up working poor, my dad would say having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. And my belief in service is so fundamental that I walked away from making a lot of good money as a tax attorney to go and become deputy city attorney for Atlanta. I ran for office, and I've been successful as a small business owner, but I've always believed that my responsibility is taking care of my family, taking care of my community, and doing the best job possible. And anyone who believes that's not why I'm running, that's the biggest misconception. I'm running because I believe in all of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other last minute questions? Well, we thank you for coming
Thank you.
to visit us
I
and
appreciate
spend some time with us. We wish you luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
She sure does. You do a lot of
It would
work.
help if you were smarter and more articulate.